Speaking of trade, that's where I focus most of my work at Cato. Our mission at Cato in the Trade Center is to educate policymakers and the public and the business community about the benefits of free trade and the costs of protectionism. Now, one might think that job is getting easier. After all, we do live in a globalized economy where more and more U.S. jobs depend on transnational collaboration in the form of integrated supply chains, transnational investment patterns. As I like to put it, the factory floor has broken through its walls and now spans oceans and borders. It's no longer apt, in my opinion, to characterize international trade as a competition between us and them. After all, who are we and who are they? 55% of the value of U.S. imports is raw materials, intermediate goods, capital equipment, the purchases of producers, not consumers. These U.S. producers depend on them, or at least their bottom lines do. Nearly 6 million Americans work for foreign-owned companies in the United States. The largest steel producer in the United States, Mittal, is a majority Indian-owned company with headquarters in Europe. The largest German steel company, ThyssenKrupp, recently completed a nearly $4 billion investment in Mobile, Alabama, to produce steel to supply primarily the burgeoning foreign transplant auto industry in the American South. And iconic General Motors, in whom we all have some ownership stake, produces more cars in China now than it does in the United States. And of course, you've heard about the supply chain that brings us Apple's products and other electronic companies, high-tech gadgets and devices. So that really speaks to the internationalization of trade. On average, according to a study by the U.S. International Trade Commission, about 50% of the value of imports from China is actually Chinese value. The other 50% is value added in other countries through their labor and components: Japan, United States, Brazil, Australia, Singapore. So it's just no longer accurate to characterize trade as our producers against their producers. Furthermore, most Americans enjoy the fruits of international trade and globalization every day, driving to work in vehicles containing at least some foreign content, using foreign-assembled or foreign content-rich phones to communicate, to shop, to navigate, to learn, to conduct business from the golf course. Americans have extra disposable income because retailers like Walmart, Best Buy, and Home Depot are able to pass on cost savings made possible by their own access to thousands of global suppliers. Many Americans earn bigger paychecks on account of their company's growing sales to customers abroad. And many enjoy salaries and benefits provided by an employer who happens to be a foreign-owned company. Yet it has not really gotten easier. The job of impressing upon people the benefits of trade has not gotten easier. Many Americans remain skeptical about trade. Most don't believe they've benefited from freer trade or that freer trade has been good for the U.S. economy. Too many Americans are of the view that exports are our team's points, imports are the other team's points, the trade account is the scoreboard. We have a deficit, which means we're losing at trade, and we're losing at trade because our trade partners cheat. They cheat with impunity. And the biggest culprit, of course, is China. In this presidential election year, China bashing is polling well. It's certainly polling better than Congress's popularity. And with Congress's public approval ratings in the single digits, the temptation of Washington policymakers to find scapegoats for their failures to achieve anything of substance with respect to the economy, our burgeoning fiscal crisis, remains alluring. Scapegoating is alluring. Americans are told that U.S. China relations are worsening, and they're worsening because of an increase in protectionist, treaty-violating, or otherwise illiberal Chinese policies that have destroyed U.S. manufacturing and the jobs that go with it. Never mind the fact that U.S. manufacturing is thriving by the most important metrics. The term trade war, which I've been reluctant to use over the years because of its sort of self-perpetuating nature, is no longer taboo. The media have portrayed the United States as a victim of myriad Chinese swindles, including currency manipulation, dumping, subsidization, intellectual property theft, forced technology transfer, industrial espionage, and other ad hoc impediments to U.S. investment and exports. Clearly, some of this is true. Certain Chinese policies have been provocative, discriminatory, protectionist, and in some cases violative of the rules of trade. But there's a lot more to the story than that. U.S. policies, politics, and attitudes have contributed importantly to rising bilateral tensions. Those who agitate for confrontation, or a more strident policy tack at least, tend to couch their own narrow interests in this us versus them narrative, as though we would all benefit from the protectionist policies they seek, when in reality that protection is likely to claim many more victims than beneficiaries. Trade wars are never won. Instead, they claim victims indiscriminately and leave significant damage in their wake. Even if one were to conclude that China's list of offenses is collectively more egregious than the U.S. list of offenses, the most sensible course of action is to avoid mutually destructive policies and to find ways to reduce frictions with China. It should not be surprising that the increasing number of commercial exchanges between the world's largest and second largest economies produce frictions on occasion. But contrary to the rhetoric, the economic relationship has not descended into this existential call to arms. Rather, both governments are engaged in what I'd call a tactical trade war, where most actions are legally defensible or plausibly justifiable within the rules of trade. That is not to say that those actions have been advisable or that their consistency with international rules and domestic laws will ultimately withstand formal scrutiny. Indeed, many have been ill-advised. But my point is that, unlike the free-for-all that erupted in the 1930s, these trade skirmishes, I would characterize them as skirmishes, have been prosecuted in a manner that speaks to mutual recognition of the primacy of, if not respect for, the rules-based system of trade. So I am still reluctant to call this a trade war.